So this video keynote is about the Square Deal, which was the name for Theodore Roosevelt's domestic policies at the turn of the century in the early 1900s. If we could try to summarize the spirit of it, right, it would be in this quotation: the country will not be a permanently good place for us to live unless it's a good place for all of us to live, which is a wonderful sentiment for a leader to have, extraordinarily inclusive. And clearly Theodore Roosevelt thought there were some issues where some people were living in a good place and other people were living in a gradual worse place in the United States, and he wanted to head that off at the pass. So Theodore Roosevelt was known to be a progressive Republican, meaning that he sort of saw both sides of the issues of the day, which were, big businesses saying, what makes this country great is growth, and guess what leads to growth? Well, profits lead to growth. So you want to keep profits high for business, and then they'll invest, and gradually, the workers will be brought up. Versus the idea that if businesses are getting outsized profits, then why aren't the workers getting more now? Why do they have to get outsized profits, and how are they getting those outsized profits? And so Roosevelt said, we demand that big business give people a square deal. In return, we must insist that when anyone engaged in big business honestly endeavors to do right, he shall himself be given a square deal. So he tried to understand the dynamic and work in the favor of the whole country rather than of either capital or labor. So what does he mean by a square deal? He means everybody has a right to getting dealt the hand that's appropriately his hand. He means this like cards. I don't know if you guys play cards anymore, but he means the deck shouldn't be tampered with to favor somebody at the table over somebody else at the table. What he doesn't mean, however, is that everybody's supposed to get roughly an equal hand to play. He knows, he's aware that the hands aren't going to be equal. Some people are going to have better hands to play than others. He doesn't think it's government's responsibility or even ability to intervene there in some profitable way for the whole country. So he's not really about redistributing wealth so much as making sure people aren't tampering with the deck. So what was going on in the country that made Theodore Roosevelt think that he needed, a sort of major domestic agenda for his administration? Why do we need a square deal? Why aren't we already getting a square deal? In 1905 or so, and he a bunch of reasons. These things called trusts, which we'll talk about here briefly, had gained monopolistic control over many industries. And they favored some some businesses over others. They used their leverage to keep prices high and to keep competition out. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. A lot of deaths from unsafe working conditions. Nobody was really monitoring, who's dying, who's getting maimed, who's breaking bones at factories. What happens if somebody gets hurt? Do you just say, oh, that's too bad, you're gone, you can't work, we'll just bring in that guy waiting outside for your job? Or is there something better to do there? A lot of deaths from unsafe food and medicine that, again, there was no real mechanism to go after the people causing those deaths. Terrible pollution coming about from the Industrial Revolution hitting its stride. And lots of people wanting to develop what ends up being the national parks before they were the national parks, and hunting and the sense that the marvels of the American flora and fauna and landscape were being snatched up by private individuals and not for the good of the country. And then on the other side of the business issue, labor unions sometimes were using their own powers to become monopolistic on the labor side and throw business out of whack. And so Roosevelt was like, none of this is good. None of this is square. Some people are rigging the deck in all of these instances, and we have to make sure that gets fixed. So the Square Deal has three main foci: the conservation of nature, consumer and worker protection, and the regulation of predatory business and labor practices. So what did the Square Deal do specifically in business regulation? Again, its goal is to break up these monopolistic tendencies of the trusts and the monopolistic tendencies of labor unions. And to do that, it passed three bills in the early 1900s, the Expediting Act, the Elkins Act, and the Hepburn Act, among others. The Expediting Act was literally to expedite this legislation, put it on the front burner, because the legal shenanigans of the businesses who had the best lawyers, they just kept getting these trials postponed whenever somebody tried to fix this. So they actually passed legislation to move these kinds of cases to the front of the line. And then the Elkins Act and the Hepburn Act are very similar. They particularly go after railroads. And one of the ways that these trusts, the oil trusts, Standard Oil and the steel maker trusts, one of the ways that they kept everybody in line, and if you didn't play ball and do what they said, if you were trying to get in the oil business and you weren't playing by Standard Oil's rules, well, they would work with the railroads to cut you out of your ability to transport your product to market, or whatever you were making, steel or whatever. So the railroads were sort of the particular means of crushing anybody who tried to enter a business where there was a trust and to undercut the trust on price. See, if you're making monopolistic profits, then those are extra high profits. And so it would make sense for somebody to enter that business and undercut you on price, because the prices are so high, there's room to still make a nice profit and lower the price a bit. Well, of course, the businesses, the trusts that were already involved didn't want the prices of their products to come down, and would then work with the railroads to make sure that this new competitor had no access to the market. So the competitor would die out. And the Elkins and Hepburn Acts regulate the railroads to make sure that that can't happen anymore. Just make sure, again, you know what these trusts are and what unions are. So trusts are business partnerships that form monopolies in order to keep competition out and thus keep the prices of their goods and services extra high, so they make extra high profits. Unions are groups of laborers who band together and use their collective power, often hinging on their ability to strike and stop production, to bargain as a group for higher wages and more benefits and safer working conditions, etc. Unions were sort of called into existence in many ways by monopolistic business practices and predatory business practices, so they threatened to shut down unless the people who own the businesses capitulate, and obviously that could be abused as well, that power. But you see, if it's just one person trying to bargain for a raise, like I'm not going to work, I'm not going to make steel today, what does the business owner care if he's got 1,000 employees and one of them says, I'm not going to work today unless you raise my wages? He'll just say you're fired and bring somebody in from outside. But if all 1,000 of them withhold their labor on the same day, now that's a huge problem for the business owner. So again, this is the tension that Teddy Roosevelt as a leader had to figure out and navigate. So these are some of the major players in the trust busting. This first guy here is J.P. Morgan of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, Pierpont Morgan. He was a fierce hater of Theodore Roosevelt. He was a leader of the finance trusts, and he thought that the business owners really understood the world, and politicians need to stay out, and it was a lot of tension between those two guys. And then, here's just three more random major players. Andrew Carnegie, who was the richest man in America for a while and is on the left, and the upper right is Cornelius Vanderbilt. And the guy at the bottom is John Rockefeller. So that's Carnegie was steel, and Vanderbilt was shipping and railroads, and Rockefeller was Standard Oil. And these guys were making a lot of money by doing what is today illegal, and by fiddling with the deck, as Teddy Roosevelt would have said, and thus he was not on the happy side with these guys. On the public safety side, there are three major pieces of legislation passed in the early 1900s as part of the Square Deal: the Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, and the Federal Employers Liability Act. And they all roughly sound like what they are. So the Pure Food and Drug Act actually made businesses label what was in their products and sort of take a lot more responsibility for the specificity of those, and gave a lot more power to people who got sick from eating tainted food and drugs to get justice. The Meat Inspection Act, he worked so hard on that because the meat at the time was just foul and disgusting. And the whole process was just so unsanitary and unhealthy, and he had a study done of that, sort of an expose. And when the meat people pushed back against this legislation, he said he would take it to the newspaper and have it published with photographs of what they found, and the meat packers backed away and acceded to the issues. And then the Federal Employers Liability Act makes it much more easy for workers to get compensation and when they're hurt on the job from their employer, and make sure the employers had safe workspaces and work floors, and did something about it if people got hurt. And here's two photos just to give you a sense of how bad it was. I mean, again, in 1900, before this legislation, just the pollution was really wreaking havoc on the neighborhoods around factories. And here's a picture of the meat packing and what that looked like, and just how disgusting it was before the changes were made. And just to give you a sense of some of the issues going on there specifically, there was a big coal strike in 1902 where the coal miners, are notoriously underpaid and incredibly dangerous work. They wanted a 10% raise and better, healthier working conditions, and the coal miners were saying, coal mining companies were saying no. this isn't up to you, and your unions are communist, and you guys should be lucky, feel lucky you have jobs. And just to quote this one guy to give you a sense of what was going on, one of the coal mine owners said, the rights and interests of the laboring man will be protected and cared for not by the labor agitators, but by the Christian men to whom God, in his infinite wisdom, has given the control of the property interests of the country. So as we move forward here, to get back to the issue of tramping the perpetual journey, remember the king said, wow, we've been put in here as kings by God, and so you guys are here for us, and everybody revolves around the king and the royalty, and because they're a stand-in for God on earth. And of course the United States was founded saying, actually no, right, that's not the way it is, and that's not the way government should be. And you had these, here's this case of the coal miner, where you have these what are called oligarchs or plutocrats, these incredibly wealthy men, small groups of wealthy men who control such a huge portion of the business world. And, they were in many ways saying, we have been put here by God. Why would we have all this wealth and power if God didn't want us to? And obviously we have a wisdom that that God must have appreciated. Otherwise we wouldn't be running these businesses. And who are you, peons, to question us? Like, you are there in a sense for us, right? And what an un-American thought that was, and it drove Teddy Roosevelt crazy. One of Teddy Roosevelt's goals, along with John Muir and a lot of other people at that time, was to conserve the natural wonders of the country for everybody's good, so they couldn't just be purchased by a handful of wealthy people, as has happened in virtually every other country, Europe in particular. So during his time in office, he created the U.S. Forest Service. He established 51 federal bird reservations, 4 national game preserves, 150 national forests, 5 national parks, enabled the American Antiquities Act, which allowed him and subsequent presidents to name national monuments. Roosevelt did 18, and there have been many, many more since. During his time in office, he protected 230 million acres of land as public land, so that everybody could enjoy it and use it. And there's not a McDonald's in Yosemite. Roosevelt, like so many strong leaders, really, truly good leaders, feels incredible gratitude. And he feels that we have an amazing heritage in America, both a political heritage of the founding and the Constitution, and on the other hand, the amazing physical grandeur of the country. And so, he's really asking everybody to respect that, and to say, like, we didn't make this country, we didn't make Yosemite, we didn't make the Grand Canyon, we didn't make the flocks of geese and the herds of elk, and we didn't make the Constitution. We just lucked into all that, and so that's just a huge gift to us, and we have to be proper stewards of it. So let's think about where this puts us on the perpetual journey, right, of the march of freedom in the United States. So again, we start with the truths that all men are created equal and have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in 1776, it's as if we say, people have value, and we're not tools of hereditary aristocrats. 1791, it's the Bill of Rights. We're like, you know what? We have value in ourselves. We don't get our rights from the country. They're there, and the country ought to respect those rights. And so the minority is not subject to the tyranny of the majority. A majority can't enslave a minority just by passing laws. There have to be protections for the minority. 1865, 66, 67, 68. People have inherent value and are not the tools of another race. Right? That's an addition that furthers the statements of the Declaration and the Constitution. And then the square deal is another move, right? It's another important move. We read about the coal mine owner who was like, you know what, would we have all this if God didn't want us to? We're really the agents of God on this earth, and we have all this money, and God must want us to, and so we'll keep making it, right? So the square deal is really an attempt to safeguard people from oligarchs and plutocrats, from hyper-wealthy businessmen who warp the economy to make sure that only that same handful of people keep making all the money. So, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and that group in 1776, they were fighting the notion that hereditary aristocrats really ran the show and everybody was sort of a tool of theirs. And now Teddy Roosevelt realizes that the hereditary aristocrats are gone, but we're at risk of having sort of economic aristocrats who have gamed the system for their own advantage and are using the workers of the country and not respecting their rights to health, their rights to have enough money from their labor to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he's guaranteeing that. Another way you could put it in the language of rights. In a sense, people's rights get expanded by the square deal. So everybody now has the right to enjoy America's natural beauty and majesty through the national parks and sanctuaries and monuments. Those can't be just bought by rich people to be enjoyed by a handful of rich people. Everybody has a right to a safe workplace. Everybody has a right to safe food and safe consumer products. And everybody has a right to compete free of monopolies, both in business and labor. So that's the movement forward on this journey of freedom and equality in the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the United States. So let's drill down on the square deal and ask if it's a good legislation or a good plan. So a couple issues that I want us to think about. On the one hand, it's the squareness of the deck we inherited, right? So he's saying, you know what, there's going to be a square deal. Nobody's going to tamper with those cards while I watch. So the question of, are those cards square before we start looking at them? And then on the other hand, something called moral hazard, which we will define here in a second. So I want us to think about whether the deck is a square deck, whether it's enough to just not let J.P. Morgan or Cornelius Vanderbilt or whoever screw with the market and to make sure that the guy on the shop floor working his 12-hour day who has unsafe working conditions now has safe working conditions. Like, is that enough? What if the deck, by the time we got it, was hopelessly screwed up in the first place? Just as an example, just try to imagine that you are the son of Cherokee parents and you live on a reservation in Oklahoma, and your parents are alcoholics and their ancestors were forced off their land that their ancestors had for hundreds of years in North Carolina in the 1830s, part of the Trail of Tears. And here you are, and you don't have good education, and you don't have good nutrition, and you're clueless, and people look down on you, and that's the hand you're dealt. And is making sure that the cards weren't tampered with while we were watching, right? That nobody's keeping that kid from a job that he's qualified for. for instance, right, as an example. But like, what about why he's not qualified for a job in the first place? And so I want us to think about that, right? What if the deck has already been tampered with before the cards are dealt, way, way back, before we even were safeguarding the cards? The other side of the problem is moral hazard. What if you go further than, let's say, you know, we do say that, wow, it seems like the square deal is not quite enough, that it should be more of a fair deal, right? As opposed to just a square deal where you get the cards you're dealt. What if you're dealt a 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 mixed suit hand? Like that's not going to win, right? And that's the hand you're dealt, and you're the Cherokee kid on the reservation. So that's one side of the issue. The other side is what we call moral hazard. What if you do try to help? What if you do try to redistribute? And out of the normal course of life, you give somebody something. Like let's say you send the Cherokee boy enough money to compensate for, so he could go to school if he wanted, or that he would just have more money to buy stuff or whatever, right? You just give somebody something that they haven't earned in traditional ways, meaning well, right? Like you really want to help them. But moral hazard is like when you become addicted to that gift. And a lot of people have the tendency to become addicted to gifts when the gifts keep coming in the mail, especially if you never even meet the person giving you the gift. It's called an entitlement. You just become that you feel you're entitled to that gift coming all the time. And so often it can have the opposite effect that was intended, where you addict somebody to the basic goods of life, and they never learn the higher goods of life that we're trying to teach y'all about working and making and building and taking on more and more and a bigger and bigger share of the good of all people on your own shoulders, right? So that's moral hazard. So of these two issues, that the deck is already unsquare when we start watching it to ensure that it's square, versus moral hazard, the tendency of people to take for granted what they're given that they didn't work for. Which of these does Teddy Roosevelt, based on what the policies end up being, which one of these does he think is the more important of the two problems that needs to be respected? And then you give it some thought yourself. Really give it some thought. What about what are we going to do about the Cherokee kid on the reservation in Oklahoma? Is he getting what he should get? Does he have genuine freedom to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is he being treated equally in the sense that you're being treated? And I'm curious as to what you think about that. Make sure we get the basics of the issue here. Overwhelmingly, people strongly tend to favor their own small in-groups of their family and their blood relatives and their immediate friends. And that is just like a genetic inheritance from our past. That worked for the longest time. In times of great scarcity, we live in a country that's unbelievably productive, and we have a lot of surplus. And so what about that tendency, right, to favor your in-group, to form trusts, right, which is like it's us against the world, and we're going to scheme to get as much as we can of the pot. And real leaders, we're trying to get you to see, real leaders realize, right, wouldn't it be great if everybody moved forward? Wouldn't it be great if everybody had genuine freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and was treated equally? What if the in-group could be everybody? And one of the great things about Teddy Roosevelt was that, he really wanted the in-group to be everybody. And but there's this issue, right? Like, how far can you go to make the in-group everybody? It's easier said than done. You can hope for the good of all people, but how are you going to help all people? What if some people don't want to be helped, or are beyond help, or that the cost of helping them would cost so much that it would reduce incentives of the in-group people and of the successful people to keep risking their capital and their investments? And so I just want you to see that this problem will never go away. This is the leader's problem, right? And the more skill the leader has, so first of all, you need empathy, so you feel with everybody, and compassion, and you own the success of everyone. But now it takes savvy, like, how are you gonna try to help everyone? How do you balance the need to keep incentives for exemplary effort with the needs to help those who have been historically left behind? That is a tough, tough business. And we just want to make sure that you realize that problem, and that you don't err on either of the two sides, namely not to care about anybody but your small little in-group on the one hand, because that will impoverish you, and then not to think this is just so as easy as taking stuff from people over there and sending it to people over there, because that screws with all sorts of incentives in a variety of ways that you have to take into account. So Teddy Roosevelt did his best, and he thought that the square deal was the best compromise possible on these issues. And so, because you might think, I'm not going to be president, so I don't have to think about these issues. I'm not going to be a politician, so I'll leave these questions to somebody else. I want to, really try to press deeper and try to get you to ask yourself, let's just say you run your own business someday, or if not run your entire own business and be a business owner, that you're the head of some division or floor or a team at where you work someday. So, like, what's your relationship going to be to those people that are under you in that organization? Let's just for the sake of ease, let's say that you're the owner of the business. Are your employees going to be in your in-group, or is your in-group just your family and your friends and the guys at the country club? Is that your in-group? So that your employees, like, they're the people who are sort of you're in competition with from that point of view, right? Because they want money too from their work. So you're going to try to maybe minimize how much money your employees get and still have them do a decent job and come to work. Is that the way you're going to deal with them? Or are they going to be in the in-group where you get to know them, you get to know their kids, you really want them to thrive because you have so much empathy and compassion for them that their success is your success? And when they can afford to send their kid to St. Mark's, or their kid goes off to UT or does well at a baseball game or whatever, it's like, wow, those are my people. And my life has expanded because I've cared for these people so well, and I know them so well, and we're all this big team. And so how's it going to go? Because it could go either way, right? How big can you get your in-group to be? And then, like, how do we start in that process? Like, how many of the kids in 8th grade are in your in-group? How many do you even want to be in your in-group? How many people are you intentionally putting in an out-group? Like, and why are you doing that? Do you see? Because it's going to end up being the quality of your life is going to hinge on your ability to have a big in-group and to actually give it care. And if you can do that, you're going to be a thriving person. And if you can't do that, you're going to be kind of stingy or really stingy, right? And so we want you to think about that now so you can start taking action to get yourself in a position where you're going to be the guy who is going to treat his employees really, really well and view them practically as part of his family. Because we don't want to just flip a coin. We don't want that just to be random how that turns out if so much hinges on it. You can actually affect how that's going to be now by deciding, you know what? Yeah, like I have an in-group of like 3 people at school. I want that to be higher, right? Why isn't everybody in 8th grade in my in-group? Why isn't everybody at St. Mark's in my in-group, right? So that's what we're going to work on. That's why we're talking about all this stuff. So we bid adieu to Teddy Roosevelt, TR, one of the great American presidents, strenuous life, square deal, massive effort on behalf of the people of this country. He helps us walk quite a ways forward in the tramping our perpetual journey as Americans.